Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my talk on how to be a resourceful Unity developer. I'm Yilmaz Kiymaz, Senior Unity Developer at InnoGames in Hamburg, Germany. Some of you might recognize me from the previous year's Unites when I talked about shaders and editor scripting. But this year, I wanted to talk about a less technical topic and share with you some of the learnings I've had over the years on improving ourselves as developers. So let's start with a blast from the past. This is Unity version 3.4.0, released on July 2011. Who here has worked with a version of Unity this old or even older? Let's get a raise of hands. That's at least half the crowd, which is wonderful. Great. Now let's take a look at this version, version 5.5.3, released March of 2017, just a few months ago. If I switch back and forth between these, do you see much of a difference? Apart from just a few layout differences and a button here and there, it doesn't look like much has changed, right? But that's not actually true. We got the new UI system in there. We got the navigation and pathfinding system, new audio mixer, mechanism animation and state machines, 2D sprites with 2D physics, baked and real-time GI, and a whole host of services, and a lot of other things that don't have an editor window, but are part of the API and have just as big of an impact. So obviously, there are a ton of features being added to Unity year over year. And at the same time, Unity deploys to so many target platforms nowadays, each with its own little peculiarities and challenges. And as we heard in the keynote yesterday, there are over 440 engineers at Unity working on the engine code. So what this means is that none of us can be on top of everything that goes on in the Unity ecosystem. But at the same time, we want to know all the answers to our problems. When we have a roadblock in our development, or when somebody comes to us with a really challenging question, we want to be able to address it right away. So what is the solution to this? The solution is to be extremely resourceful. And you might be thinking, what the hell does that mean? Let's break it down to 4 categories. First is knowing how to find specific information quickly. Second is constantly taking in new information from good sources. Third is having a lot of tools at your disposal and being able to write your own tools. And fourth is being well connected. Now, you might be an independent developer trying to do everything on your own, or you might be a senior or a lead at a very big company trying to solve a lot of different problems at once. You could be a junior or even a student wanting to expand your knowledge, or you could be anything else, like a frog on a unicycle. All of these skills will help you get better and solve the challenges that you will face in the future as developers. So for finding information quickly, if you ask anyone nowadays, the first thing they're going to say is Google it. But even Google doesn't know everything. I asked it when Unity's nested prefabs are coming, and Google doesn't know. But on a less sarcastic note, sometimes a Google search doesn't yield any useful information, right? Or sometimes the information can be very hard to find or not there at all. So in those cases, we got to go to other channels. The first channel I'd like to hit is Twitter. And the reason for this is Twitter has this 140-character limitation per tweet, which means the rate of communication is really high and it's consumed very quickly. I could send a tweet right now and receive a reply from someone who knows about the topic in less than a minute. So what you need to do on Twitter is you need to make sure that a lot of people can see your tweet so that the likelihood that you'll get a reply back is high. What I do in these cases when I want to ask a question about Unity is use the Unity 3D and game dev hashtags. A lot of Unity users and a lot of engineers who work at Unity themselves follow this hashtag. And I've had quite a few situations in my life as a developer where I hit a roadblock, I tweeted about it after not being able to find the solution online, and just within a few minutes or hours, I was able to find the solution. So I'd like to talk to you, show you a couple examples of those. Recently, we had this problem in our project. It's a mobile game that the build size was too high. We wanted to stay under the 100 megabyte cellular download limit, and we were already above by like 8 megabytes, and we had already optimized all our assets, our project in general, and it was up to me to find a solution to this problem. So I tried to attack it from a different angle. I made an iOS build, which creates an Xcode project, right? And then using an app, I looked at what was taking the most space in that Xcode project directory. Now that it's not equal to your build size in the end, but it can give you a rough idea what's going into your build. And inside of the Xcode project directory, there is a data directory where Unity puts all your asset files and scene files. And I noticed that for each scene file that we had in our project, we had a corresponding .res file, which I didn't know what it was doing there. And each of them was the same size, 393 kilobytes for each scene in our project. And we had about 150 scenes. The reason for that being we needed something like nested prefabs for our dialogue system, and it's not there, so we use scenes. And when you added this all up, if you took all those res.s files, compressed them, it added to about 10 megabytes of difference in our final build size, which was exactly the kind of amount we wanted to take out from it. So not finding any information online about this in the documentation or with a Google search, I turned to Twitter and I tweeted, does anyone know what the res.s files are for in Unity builds? There's one for almost every scene in my project. And Aras responded, is it visible there? Streaming resources, I think, like audio, which wasn't exactly telling me what the problem was, but it helped me get like this eureka moment saying, okay, something in my scenes must be referencing something that gets serialized per each scene for some reason. So I looked through the hierarchy of our simplest scene, and the only thing it referenced was a single mono-behavior script. So that couldn't be what was causing this res.s file for being created. And I was thinking to myself, what else could a scene reference apart from what is referenced on the game objects and the components in the hierarchy? Then I remembered the lighting tab. And in the lighting tab, under environmental lighting section, there can be a reference to a default skybox or a cube map. And I noticed that all my scenes had this default skybox reference. And when you open that material, you see that it actually generates a procedural texture. So due to some oversight or bug in Unity, it turns out that the default skybox will, the procedural texture for the skybox will get serialized for each one of your scenes and result in something like a 300 to 400 kilobyte file in your builds. So what I did then was remove it here, make a build, and I saw the res.s file was gone. Then I wrote a grep small bash script and went through all my scenes and removed this reference, and I had just saved 10 megabytes from my build size. And it was all thanks to Aras telling me what this res.s file was for. Another example is nowadays when you make a build from Unity for iOS or Android, we use the IL2CPP scripting backend, right? Which means all our C# code gets converted to C++, and that step usually takes a really long time. I mean, even for a medium-sized project, that step can easily take upwards of 10 minutes. And if you want to iterate over something throughout the day, you have to deploy to device multiple times. That's a lot of downtime you would ideally want to avoid. So I thought, what if we could change the final C++ code instead of changing the C# code in our project? It's not as easy as changing the C# code, but it should at least get me some results. So in this very specific instance, what I needed to change was a string literal. And that's where you can say string x equals abc.txt or something like that. And that abc.txt inside of the code is a string literal. And however I searched my Xcode project, I could not find the string literal anywhere. When I played my game, it would show up, but I couldn't find where it was stored. So I went to Twitter and I asked, where do the string literals in C# code go when you make an IL2CPP build? And Ralph from Unity responded pretty quickly saying they're in the global-metadata.dat file. And I thought, great, I'll just open the file up, edit it, and then move on with my testing. But when I opened it up, I noticed it wasn't a text file. It wasn't binary, and I didn't know the format. So I asked, I assume there's no easy way to change them in that file, making a new IL2CPP build for changing a string literal hertz sad face. And he said, well, we haven't documented the format, but you could look in libIL2CPP on how it currently looks like in layout, and then hex edit it. And at that point, I said, OK, I'm probably not going to do that. That sounds like a lot of trouble. So I'm just going to change up my methodology of how I'm iterating on this specific problem instead of having to deal with this. And I'm sure it is possible to deal with it. If you had something that required you to do this, you could. But for me, it was enough to know what the correct answer was so that I could move on with my work. Another channel that I like for finding specific information is Slack. And on Slack, you need to be part of a specific team and on a specific channel to send a message to anyone. It's not like Twitter where you can just tweet and then potentially anybody could see it. So in our case, to find information on Slack, we need to be on a good team with a lot of Unity users on there. Luckily, there's the Unity devs.signup.team, Unity Slack team, that you can join. It looks like this. On the left, you can see the channels that I'm subscribed to, like code, editor scripting, shaders, showcase, etc. And there's even more channels for specific areas like rendering and AI and services and so on. And like on Twitter, engineers from Unity also hang out on these Slack channels. So you can even get an answer directly from the horse's mouth. Another channel I like to use is GitHub, especially its code search feature. If there's some Unity API call that recently landed in a new version, for example, and it doesn't have decent documentation, which can be the case, or it doesn't have example code, what you can do is you can go to GitHub and do a code search specifically for that API call. And then you can see how other people are using it in their projects and learn from them. And for example, here we're searching for build pipeline.build asset bundles, which is kind of a black box. I think it's being improved, but still it's kind of hard to know what comes out of this, what goes into it. So you could search for something like this and see what other people are doing with this API call. Speaking of documentation, a good way of getting to documentation quickly and using it efficiently is to use an app like Dash, which is a documentation browser, which makes it much faster to get to it. Let me quickly show you what it looks like. So here's Dash. You can see on the left, I have a bunch of documentation sets already installed for Bash, Unity, Python, and .NET Framework. One good thing about this is once they're downloaded, they're local on your machine, so searching for them is faster. Getting the results of the searches are faster because you're not waiting for a web request. But the other good thing is you can add favorite pages and annotations and a lot of stuff where it just makes it so much easier if you keep going through the documentation that day to just get the information you want really quickly. And if we look at the download section, you can see there are doc sets for a lot of languages and a lot of frameworks and tools here. So you could do this for many, many different things. I just added the doc sets that I use most frequently, for example. There are even cheat sheets that you can download that are really helpful. Like, I can't remember what all the Bash shortcuts are, so I just got the cheat sheet here that I downloaded with the click of a button, and I can refer to this several times during the day really quickly. You can also go to the Unity forums and answers websites, quite obviously, and ask your question there. But in my experience, it takes a bit more effort to get useful knowledge out of forums or answers because a lot of people will misinterpret your question, and you need to provide a lot of information and maybe sometimes an example project to be able to get useful information out of here. So that might be your last resort. Actually, your last resort could be to sell your soul to Satan, but the waiting times for that, I think, are quite high now. So you should really start with the highest leverage activity. And what that means is you want to put in the minimum amount of effort into it, but get the most out of it. Hopefully. That's why I like Twitter so much, is you can craft a really short message and hopefully get a response back really quickly. But one point I like to make is that even though these channels specifically are really popular right now, I'm not saying go use these in the exact way that I'm showing you how to use them. The idea is that you should find other channels of information for yourself other than just searching on Google. Not that you should use these specifically. So the next topic where we can improve ourselves is taking in new information. We want high-quality, low-noise sources from which we can gain new knowledge. And we want this process to be automated and fast. We don't, let's say we know 10 websites where they publish really good information. We don't want to go back there every day to see if they publish something new, right? So in this case, we would like to use something like an RSS reader where we can subscribe to these channels and get this information automatically. So I use something called Feedly just because the free version meets all my needs. Just want to show it to you real quick what it looks like. I mean, most of you probably know what an RSS reader is, and most of you are using it. But here, for example, I have, oh, you're not even seeing it, sorry. Oh, here it is. Yep, I have all my channels here on the left side. I have a category specifically for game development where I follow things like, Gama Sutra News, Road to VR, Alan Zucconi, which I'm going to talk about a bit later, and a whole bunch of other websites. And then every day, I just sit down for 10 minutes and go through all these new things that have been published, look through the interesting ones that I like, and then go back to my work with some new knowledge gained. So I want to talk about a few of my favorite sources of information. There's, of course, the Unity blog, which is a great source of information. Very in-depth blog posts are published there. And the good thing is they're also categorized, so you can subscribe to a specific category as well. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's the Unity blog. The latest blog post is about Unite Europe 2017. And you could use this button right here to subscribe to the whole Unity blog, or you could go down to a category like technology and subscribe only to that category if you wanted to. So that's one. Another one of my favorites is the Unity release notes feed. Whenever a new version of Unity comes out, reading the release notes for me is like joy, because that's where you get all the information about what was improved in this build, what was changed in this build, what bugs were fixed, and if there are any known issues. And if you've been working on a project for a long time with Unity on a specific version, you know that bugs can really bite you in the arse. So you want to know the moment they're fixed. So that's why subscribing to the release notes feed is really important, in my opinion. We can take a look at, there's two web pages really you can follow, and there is a RSS feed for one of them, but there isn't one for the other, unfortunately. So there's the Unity download archive where all the major and minor releases are listed, but there's also the patch releases page where you can see the release notes for specific patch releases that let you get certain fixes earlier than you would otherwise. So You can look through the release notes. And like Lucas mentioned in the keynote yesterday, the list of bug fixes is usually much, much larger than the list of improvements, because that's really something we feel Unity should be more stable and should be more bug-free. And they're really putting a lot of effort into it, which you can see directly in the release notes. And you can also see there are links to the issue tracker numbers for these bugs. So you can go to the description of the bug and the issue tracker and see exactly what it is that was fixed. I also like subscribing to specific dev blogs if the author of those blogs really share valuable information. I want to tell you about a couple favorite of mine. First of all, Alan Zucconi that I mentioned earlier. He makes hands down the best tutorials that I've seen for Unity, period. And he does them over a very wide range of topics. So just over here we can see he has fur shading in Unity, volumetric rendering, inverse kinematics, forward kinematics, nested coroutines, fading sprites, et cetera, et cetera. And these aren't just like single one-off short articles. They're usually a series of articles that really go into this topic in depth. And they're all for free over there. If you want to support him, you can sign up to his Patreon and get early access to these or get access to extra content. But definitely go check this guy out if you want to learn some new things about Unity, maybe some areas of it that you haven't touched before. There's also Keijiro Takahashi. I think he's a relatively recent hire of Unity, works in Unity Japan as a graphics engineer. And this guy, as you can see, has over 350 repositories on GitHub. And these are all graphics experiments that he has made. And I think I have a few of them open here. They're inspiring as hell. Custom particle systems, vertex animations on top of skin meshes to do really cool stuff. This one is about creative coding and being able to deal with unusual inputs, like you can see he's controlling something from his phone over there. And a reaction framework for reacting to audio from your microphone. And a retro 3D effect where you can decrease the precision of your vertex attributes to make it look like you're playing one of those old PlayStation 1 games, And like I said, he has over 300 repositories of these, all of them really interesting. So you can subscribe to his Tumblr. You can find his website easily. There's a link right here. And just take it for inspiration or look at the repositories that he's putting up there to get some knowledge. And finally, we have Aras's blog. Aras, I cannot pronounce his last name for the life of me, but he used to be a graphics engineer at Unity. Now he's a build engineer. And recently he said, well, I don't post so much about Unity here anymore, but even just the archive of blog posts that he has on his blog is really valuable. You can go in there by category and read his blog posts. You will get a lot of insider information on how features were developed for Unity, a lot of the internal conversations they had while developing them, what specific things they worried about, and so on. So I would definitely recommend this blog as well. The Unity Slack team I mentioned earlier, it's good for finding specific information, asking questions, but it's also really great for getting new knowledge in general, because with all these different channels on there, there's a lot of conversation happening where you can just listen to it and learn a lot from. I'm just going to quickly show you what the channels look like. Here it is. There are 66 channels on the Unity Slack team, going from paid work, Android, game design, network, AI, animation, iOS, any kind of thing you can think about, and most of them are really highly populated. So you can enter any one of these, like profiling, join the channel, and ask a question, and in less than a day you will get a very good answer, probably from someone who knows a lot about it, or maybe from a Unity engineer himself. And finally, I'd recommend that you poke your head outside of your own field every once in a while as well. We all know game development is a very multidisciplinary endeavor, so it always helps to be able to understand and talk intelligently with people in other fields. I personally like to follow news about tools and software that artists use so that I get a good overview of what we can make use of when there are problems that arise when code and art meets basically technical artist stuff. A resourceful developer should also have a lot of tools at his disposal and a desire for automation. As developers, we want to stay away from manual labor as much as possible and spend our time working on unique and interesting problems. To that end, a resourceful developer should be able to utilize existing tools and also write his or her own. Since we're talking about Unity, the very first thing we have to mention, of course, is editor scripting, which I love. It cannot be stressed enough what an impact editor tool can have to your workflow and just how much error-free you can make your whole process. I would definitely recommend looking on YouTube for talks of previous Unites for editor scripting if you really want to be convinced of their power. And if any of you went to the Shadow Tactics talk earlier today, they had this one slide where the whole page was just editor tools in menu items, and they even had a tool to search through their tools. That's how useful they are. So I don't know how it's like for most people, but writing editor tools for me is like heroin, and I've never done heroin, but I'm pretty sure it would feel the same. So I would definitely recommend you go and try it. Another useful skill to have for writing tools and automating workflows is knowing scripting languages such as Bash or Python. And you might ask, okay, we have editor scripting, why don't we just write our tools in C# and run them in the editor? But one reason you might not want to do that is if you have a really long running process, some really long computation, you can actually block the Unity editor and then you can't do anything in the editor anymore. Of course, there are ways around this. You could run it on a separate thread. You could use a new task system maybe of Unity. But more importantly, these scripting languages are very well optimized for writing tools and glue code really efficiently, so you can get a lot of stuff done in very few lines of code. So I would definitely recommend that you learn at least one scripting language of some sort. By now, I'm sure everybody knows the profiler window in Unity, which we use a lot to optimize our games. But you should also know that there are other profiling tools out there that you can use, and sometimes it's even necessary to use them to get the kind of data that we need. So making yourself familiar with stuff like instruments on macOS, or Visual Studio debugging and profiling on Windows, or even the graphics profilers available for Android platform can be really useful because those will actually let you profile and optimize and test your shaders, which you usually can't do. And also open source projects. There are so many good open source projects for Unity out there. Just to name a few, something like Zanject for dependency injection, Entitas for entity component system. There's the incremental compiler to make your compilations faster, Bullet Sharp Unity 3D for integrating the bullet physics engine into Unity, and being able to do some cutting edge stuff like soft bodies, which we still can't do to this day with physics in Unity. Blows my mind. And VRTK, which is the virtual reality toolkit, which is kind of like the de facto standard for what you import into the project to get started with a VR project. And there's also a lot of stuff on the asset store. We all know that. But as the guys in the Shadow Tactics talk also mentioned, sometimes it's better to write your own tools. You don't want to invent the wheel from scratch every time, but for very certain things that are very specific to your project, you won't be able to just find a good tool exactly for that purpose on the asset store. Make use of what's out there, and before buying it, make sure that it's actually stable and won't disrupt your workflow, but also be ready to write your own tools. And the final topic I'd like to talk about is being well connected. Now, it should go without saying that the first step to this is being friendly. We talked a lot during this talk about gaining knowledge and being resourceful, but we shouldn't let all that knowledge go to our heads and turn us into like a know-it-all asshole. So we should be open to sharing our knowledge with others, because sharing is caring. And the more you share with other people, the more likely that they will want to be connected with you, and that is also in your benefit. A lot of people that are new to the industry are afraid that somebody will steal their idea, so they don't share their idea at all, which is the worst thing you can do as an inexperienced developer. You want the feedback that other people can give you, the more experienced people than you, and the possibility or the risk of your idea being so great and it being stolen and executed upon so well so that somebody else makes millions off of it is so minuscule that you really shouldn't worry about it, and you should really value the feedback you get much, much more than that. Another key thing to being connected is getting out there. You're all here at Unite. Kudos to you for that. But a conference like this is only as useful as the amount of connections you can make here. I mean, you could have watched this talk 2-3 weeks from now when the conference is over, right? And you wouldn't have really missed all that much. But what you want to do is meet as many people here as possible. And I know it's hard. You can be shy or nervous talking to other people. I know I am. But we all got to get over it. And if you need a little support, no shame in having a couple beers or something before going to a crowd of people to network. You can also connect with people online, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Slack, etc., all the channels that we've mentioned so far. And that's also really valuable. But don't think that online communications can completely replace physical interaction with other people, because we still aren't at that point yet where we've meshed virtual reality and real reality, where they're kind of on the equal level. So always be open. Always go to stuff like local meetups, local Unity user groups, which I forgot to mention. Local Unity meetups are the most amazing thing. They're all over the world now. There's probably one in your city. If not, there's probably one in a neighboring city. And if not, you should start one in your city right now. It's so much easier to start them nowadays because Unity provides a lot of support. And I've met so many good friends and met so many professionals at these meetups that I can ask questions to. I've honestly lost count. And when I moved to a new city, I moved around the world quite a bit nowadays, until now, and that's one of the first social events that I go to. And I've been to ones in Boston, Istanbul, Hamburg, and Dublin. I hope to go to many more. And like as I said before, you should try to be connected with people across all disciplines, not just your own discipline, because the more we understand each other, the better we're going to work together, and the more resourceful you will be when it comes to problems that meet at the junction points of two different disciplines. So to recap, we talked about 4 areas in which you can improve yourself as a developer to become more resourceful. First is knowing how to find specific information quickly. Second is constantly taking in new information from very good sources. Third is having lots of tools at your disposal and being able to write them. And fourth is being very well connected. Thank you for your attention. I would like to mention that InnoGames is hiring, so if you're on the job hunt, please go on our website and check out our open positions. You can even send an unsolicited application, and we will still look at it. And if you have any questions, please come to the front of the stage so I can clear the stage, because the next presentation will take some time to set up, and I can answer your questions down here. Thanks.